Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Kevin Porman. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce, and I have a very special guest with me here today. This is Simon Goodyear. Simon, you want to say something about yourself?
I'm Simon Goodyear, and I have the strange honor of having been on the first ever Code Live. And yeah, that's me. I'm an ex Salesforce developer, although I still do tinker. And I think pretty sure you're going to beat me up about this today, Kevin, aren't you?
Uh, when you say ex Salesforce developer, you want to say more about that?
Well, I mean, I developed on the platform since kind of 2012, but more recently, my role has taken me much more into a management type position where they don't let me loose on code because apparently I'm a liability now.
All right, now this is when I should drop in the special effect that gives you the pointy hair, but I didn't
Yes.
prepare that. If you've got questions for the pointy-haired boss, direct them at Simon. Otherwise, we'll be working today on our very first Code Live episode. We built a metadata driven trigger system. So you would define your triggers, what order you want them to run, what classes you want them to run in custom metadata. And then there was one trigger, didn't matter what object it was, it would run this one trigger and it would figure out what to do. And we're going to pull that into Apex recipes today. So we've done some of this before, but we've also got an updated version of the trigger handler and some other things going on. So why don't we start by developing the custom metadata object? And I've gone in there and I've already created the custom metadata object here, but we have to put some fields on this. And to do that, we're going to create the custom field here. And I'm going to be stupid simple with the naming. But we're going to do the first one is a metadata relationship. You ever played with these, Simon?
I loved these when they got introduced. I thought these were fantastic. Being able to reference some other piece of metadata.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And specifically, what we're going to be doing is an entity definition, and we're going to call this one object. And if you're wondering why we would do this, because you could use a string, you could say account as a string, but then you don't end up with the sort of referential integrity that you could have just by doing this relationship here. So we're going to do it. We're going to mark it as required, and we'll do a new one. What else should we put in here?
How about trigger order?
Trigger order.
Execution
Okay.
order?
Execution order. Yeah, because the idea here is you might have multiple trigger handler classes you want to run, and this will let you order them. So put them in order. We'll do execution order. And yeah, we'll do 18 characters. This should also be required. Should we make this unique? No, that's going to be unique across all the records, isn't it? Not just against that metadata entity relationship.
Which wouldn't necessarily matter, though. I mean, you could do that because you'd still get a unique order. It would just be sparse.
Yeah, just thinking it might be really kind of annoying to have to figure out what range you could use. Let's leave it as not unique for now at least. Okay, and let's see here. And then let's see one new. Maybe save and new. And we need the class, don't we? Now, I was thinking it'd be cool if we could do a metadata relationship to a class, but alas, not allowed.
Can you not?
No.
That's a shame.
Yeah, you can do a piece of metadata, but apparently for this purposes, a class doesn't count as a metadata. So we'll have to do this one as text, and we'll call this one class. And
Maybe we should be allowed to do that and specify an interface that has to implement as well. But that might be just me getting carried away with custom metadata
yeah, that would be cool.
as a constraint. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool. Maybe I will go rattle some cages internally and see why we can't do that. You know, minor things. So we got our metadata here. We should probably create one of these just so that we can make some queries and do some tests. So I'm going to do test, and let's do account. What do you think?
Let's do account. Yeah, always account. Yeah.
Execution order 1 class. We have an account trigger handler, I believe. Account trigger handler. Account trigger handler. There we go. So yeah, we could do account trigger handler.
Yep.
Put that in there. Save. Okay, now I'm going to jump back over to the code here, and I'm just going to type out a couple of notes, because for people who are joining us and may not quite understand what we're doing, we want to have n number of trigger files that each contain, I can type, call the same code. Same code. So that there's zero logic in the triggers themselves. Yeah, you don't get to code, and I apparently can't type. So
we make a great pair.
I think for April Fool's Day, I'm gonna rename the show Typo Live. And then we're gonna have a trigger handler that is going to determine what trigger handler classes to run and in what order. Mm-hmm. And we're going to build all this into our trigger handler itself. So when we look at our trigger handler, this is a virtual class, which means that you can extend it with classes that are that extend this. So if we look at account trigger handler, we're extending trigger handler. And this is similar to an interface, except that when a virtual class, you can have some methods that are predefined and some that can be overridden, right?
Yeah.
And we want to look at this run method. And I think actually, let's think this through. If we have this going on, we're going to need one trigger handling class for it to implement and run that would broker out to all the rest of them, right?
Well, yeah, so our trigger handler class will then call the other handlers, the actual code that we want, that we've got inside of our metadata, right? So,
because when we look at triggers, if I find the triggers, where are my triggers? Triggers, here we go. And I open account trigger. I've got all of our scopes set up, but I've got to have something to put here. So we got to have like a generic implementing class for our one trigger. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new class, and we'll call this one metadata trigger handler. And I'm going to put it in a custom directory of trigger recipes. And we'll have this extend. Is it extend or it's extend, right?
It extends, yeah. You implement an interface and extend everything else.
Yeah. Extends trigger handler. And then I don't know that we actually need anything here, because we're going to rely on the default run method to kick over, or we could use this to override. Let's open up the trigger handler again. It got closed. So public void. Yeah, we could just override the run method, right?
Override run method in the metadata trigger handler?
Yeah. So we could do override public void run. I think that public void run, yep. So if we override that, just like these down here, I don't think we've got to. Gotta scroll through all this code here.
Yeah, I know where you're going.
The context methods.
Yeah, they're not. So run's not virtual though, right? So can you override a
No,
I think it's not virtual.
We can't, but we could make it virtual, right? They don't have to
Oh,
be
it's
over.
ours. It's our code.
Right.
Doesn't have to be.
So let's scroll back up to run. Okay, so I'm going to do public virtual, which means we can override. It doesn't have to be overridden. Run. We'll save that. And then over here in our metadata trigger, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the run method as it is, so that we have a good idea of what we're starting with.
And I guess the nice thing about doing it this way, rather than just changing that base trigger handler class, is we can continue to use trigger handler
exactly
in other types of trigger handler, right?
Yeah, so it'll be a in-place update that you can implement over time, rather than
yeah
you got to go do this. And by the way, if you got questions, comments, snide remarks for me or the PHB, feel free to ask on the YouTube comments or here in the stream chat, and we'll be happy to tackle them. Let's see here. So we're going to validate our run and add to the loop count. These are sort of things we have to do.
Kind of things you got to do. Yeah.
And then here, we should probably figure out what kind of object we're dealing with. And the good thing about triggers is triggers will always have the same object type. So if we grab the first instance or the first entry in the list, we'll know what object type it is, and we can.
They'll all be the same.
Yeah, they'll all be the same. So I'm gonna accidentally click on the wrong file. I'm gonna go down out of this, and I'm gonna create a helper method. Private string s object type. Yeah. Naming things is hard.
Why string? Why string? Why not s object type?
So just s object? I mean, we have that metadata relationship there, so we could probably do that. Or would it be s object describe?
Type, isn't it?
Is it s object type?
Yeah, I think so.
We'll
I could be completely wrong.
We'll find out. And then we need to. I'll just save it. See if it kicks back and says no. Switch over to the output screen there. Okay, so while it's saving that, we can turn around and say if, and we're gonna. And there's been some debate on Apex Recipes, the GitHub repository, about what some people are not happy that we're implicitly using trigger.new and trigger.new map outside of an actual .trigger file. And the contention that they're putting forth is that we should be passing those in to a constructor. And I see what they're saying. However, that could lead to this bit of code being reused outside of a trigger context. And I don't know that I want that to happen. So if we make it so that it uses trigger new, then we have to be inside of a trigger context. Otherwise, this will just fail.
It will. Is there not even a method on trigger that tells you whether you're in a trigger context?
No.
Is there not?
No. So I'm going to do not null, just to make sure that we there. Well, you could do a quiddity check. I mean, for right now, let's do it this way and keep with the way that the rest of the trigger handler is working. So do a null check, and then we'll return trigger new, because we just need the first one, .get s object. It's s object type. .get describe. .get. So I was going to do get name, but But I could do get
I mean,
object
yeah, I mean,
type like that.
you don't need to do the describe if you do that.
Yeah, you should do get object type, and then else. Oh, because we have to do this null check because it could be a after delete, so we could have
Good.
Trigger old. So trigger old dot get subject type like that. And then those are the only two conditions, so I don't have to spend anything to return that. Let's see if it likes that.
It doesn't. I mean, it does not like my problem we've got there.
Uh-oh. Method is not visible. Validate run. Make it protected so that I can call it. Trigger handler add to loop count, so handler add to loop. Make that protected. Refactoring is fun.
It's what we live for, isn't it?
I mean, sure. I mean, I think I grew up on the idea that we live for the weekend, but maybe that's just a bad rock song. Let's see here.
Yeah.
Context. Still doesn't like that. Validate method is not visible. Why doesn't it like that? We're protected. We're extending trigger handler. We're not overriding the methods. So we should be able to see this. It should be... Let's see. Method is not visible. Boolean trigger.
Yeah.
Was that a cat?
A cat. What?
I thought I heard a cat.
I have 4 cats, which is why I was like, where's the cat?
Ah. Maybe this will recompile and let it work. Let's see if we've got any comments here. Question from on YouTube. Hello, I would like to know whether we should use with sharing, without sharing, inherited sharing, or leave it blank for trigger handler Apex classes. Thanks. So I have strong opinions on this. Do you have strong opinions on this, Simon?
I feel as though I should, but I generally always put.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I feel as though I should.
Muscle memory is a strong thing.
I feel as though I should have something strong to say. Anything around trigger handlers, I always put with sharing because you're trying to shift context, right? The triggers are a kind of system context, and you need to get out of that.
Yeah.
Quickly, right?
So I tend to do inherited sharing.
Okay.
But so here I'm going to give you a backwards answer. Thank you on YouTube. My answer is you should never use without sharing unless you've got a very specific and well-documented reason you need to. And it's hard for me to come up with reasons for why you would want to do that outside of some very specific things around communities, or if you are, for instance, writing to a file, writing to a field that is encrypted or in otherwise some way with that end user could specify but never read, that kind of thing. So I always use, and the differences between inherited and with sharing are kind of subtle. So I encourage you to read the full docs on that, and then decide how you want to handle that. Why is this?
Because that, I think you auto completed. That should say, yeah, protected. I thought it was just my eyes catching that earlier. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Maybe that's why it wouldn't save. I was like, oh, what's going on? Protected should work fine. Whew. Watch it. I've done it other places too. I use this plugin for Visual Studio Code called Tab 9, and I am a huge fan of it. Type is not visible. Trigger context. Ah.
I thought you updated that one.
Yeah, it's an enum. All right, let's see if that did it.
What's tab 9?
So tab 9 uses artificial intelligence and data models based on other code in your org or in the project. And so if you've got this saved as a workspace, it reads your entire workspace and then can provide predictive and intelligent code completion for any language based on what the rest of your project is. And I'm a huge fan of it. It works great. There's a couple things that I don't like. Every time I do, let me see if I can trigger it. If I do foo dot, it wants to automatically start a query, and if I just hit enter, then it starts. That old game about start typing something and then hit autocomplete, the center autocomplete button on your phone. You can almost do that with tab 9, but I'm a big fan. This gave me a GAC error. Let's see if we can't try that again. Saving. Last week, the song of the week was Boolean. It's what you see. It's what you sing in your head when you see a Boolean, but you say it like Jolene, and then you sing the song.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do things like that to me. Please.
I'm getting a GAC error, and I wonder if it's on this protected enum. I wonder if you can't have a protected enum.
Maybe you can't have a protected enum. Yeah.
Well, today I learned. Nope, no protected enums. Let's see here. Where can I get the repo after this session? The repo is at is Trailhead Apps. Let's just pull open that, and we'll go to the proper. Is it running? Ruh-roh. How is it not? Oh, I'm logged out. That's why. Okay, so we can go to github.com/trailheadapps Apex recipes, and all the code is right here. And then Juan wants to know, could you share your VS Code theme? It looks great. Actually, I'm super proud of this because it is actually in the marketplace as Cody's Embed by 10. So if you're in Visual Studio,
that published the other day.
Yeah, if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can go to the extensions and you can search for Cody's. And Cody's Embed by 10, right there. It says Salesforce, but I'm the one who made it. Not that I'm proud. It's like my little baby. Anyway, we'll go back to our code here. Let's see. It changed it. Now, just out of curiosity, just for grins and giggles, I'm going to change this back to protected to see if that is what's throwing the GAC. Yeah. But we've got our metadata trigger handler. We got this working. Now we got to figure out what we want it to do. So we're going to pull our SObject type. And now we need to run a query, right? Ruh-roh.
That would be good.
It is. Referencing type contains unexpected modifier. No protected enums.
No protected enums.
Public. The more you know.
We're providing a service. That's what we're doing.
I know. Yes, we are providing a service here. So we're going to say SObject type is equal to get SObject type.
Can you use type as a variable name?
I can't. I'm going to have to misspell it. Drive you nuts.
Don't. Oh, not again.
We'll do type. No, because it's contained in that method, we can just call this in our query. No, we can't, because if we're going to do it in...
No, we can't, because I changed... well, let's go and change it to return the string again.
No, that's fine. We'll do SObject type, and we'll do... Okay.
Call it type with an I, it's fine.
Object type. There we go. Now it's more descriptive, not anything misspelled. And then... what we can do, we're going to need a list of metadata, data trigger handle metadata trick. What did I call that? Now we go back to what?
Yeah, sorry. That was squeal for I don't know. I can't remember.
Yes, metadata driven trigger is what I called it. Metadata driven trigger. All these are, and then triggers is a keyword. So this is where we bring back the successful return of trigger.
Trigger. Here we go.
Triggers. And we'll do select. We don't need the label or the name or anything like that. So we just need the object. No, we don't even need that. We just need that in the where clause.
We don't need the no.
So we need the execution, the class, and execution order. Actually, we don't even need that.
Yeah. Order it, right?
Yep. From metadata driven trigger.
I call me old-fashioned, but I'm loving seeing kind of like nice formatted queries.
Oh, I know, right?
Rather than what?
I love nicely formatted queries. From order, well, no, we'll do where.
Let's have a where, shall we? Yeah.
Where, and we'll say object is equal to object type. And if this goes wrong, it's right there, because this may not be. I don't know that these two are comparable. The entity relationship type.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they are.
We may have to switch back to string.
I'm thinking that I got it wrong, but I'll own up to it.
Order by execution order C. Yeah, I think that's a good query.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then what we want to do is now do a for loop. And we're getting a metadata trigger, so for MDT. And this is going to be in triggers.
Nice.
Yep, got to bring the triggers back. Now,
so can I just ask a question on this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Just because, so as a personal slight bugbear, but like in this situation here, why not for each trigger in triggers? You're crossing up, you're mixing up names by having MDT.
All right. Trigger. And then what we need to do is we need to instantiate the handler class that we're going to get back. And this is sort of the magic of this whole bit. Let's call this one handler. And we're gonna dynamically invoke or dynamically instantiate a class, but we're not going to instantiate it as a concrete S-object class. We're going to instantiate it as its parent class, the trigger handler, and that will only work if the class we're instantiating also implements or extends the one that we're doing here. So we're going to say this is a trigger handler, and then we'll do type for name, and we'll do trigger dot class dot new instance, like that. And that's what this is doing, is we're going to take that name. So in our case, the one example we created was account trigger handler. So take account trigger handler and instantiate an instance of it, but treat it as if it we're going to sort of generically, I wouldn't say downcast, but we're going to go from a concrete class to to that virtual class here. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can then call the handler methods directly. And it occurs to me that might fail.
Yeah, this was going to be my next question.
So try try the trigger. Put
I'll
this.
try it.
Yep.
I mean, we could be smarter than that, right?
Say more.
So we could actually instantiate it without casting it and kind of just have it as an object, and then check it to see if it's an instance before you cast.
Well, this sounds like
a try catch.
This sounds like a well. This part, type for name, could return null. So you could get a null pointer error trying to run instance of on it.
Instead of, yeah, okay.
So I mean,
all right.
I like what you're saying.
I'm trying to avoid the try catch. I always find that, in my head, try catches are expensive, and this is something we kind of expect could happen.
Yep. I'm trying to think if there's a way for us to not have a try catch around this portion, because that could always throw a null pointer exception, I think. Somebody else out there on the chat has a better idea. Feel free to join us. Somebody's asking, is it going to run one SOCL query for every S object type? Yes, Raji, it will. The good news is this will only run one query per invocation of the trigger, because every different S object type will result in a different trigger execution, which would result in that one single query.
Also, am I wrong in saying custom metadata queries now don't count against your SOCL limit?
Ooh.
Did I see that recently? I could be wrong.
I think that's at the end of the month when we get to Spring 21. And because we have the static assessors coming, so you can treat a custom metadata type kind of like a list custom setting, where you can say, get me the get records of this one. You'd still have to filter them.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's any better. So we're going to continue our loop. Continue. If we fail here, so we're going to go on to the next trigger. And then, let's see. Then we can just sort of dispatch this based off of what we're doing, right? So this same code is going to work, but we're going to need to put it in our for loop. Yeah. And then instead of it being this, I do believe it's going to be handler.
Just handler now, right?
Yeah. Let me see. I feel like you've got
a mismatched indentation on your switch, I think.
Do I? It's hard to get everything in one and still have...
I think you need to indent your switch, the wens on the switch, and everything will be okay.
I think you're right. Let's do that. In order to get a font size big enough for streaming, it's hard to get everything in there. And then I'm just going to do a search and replace for this. 5 of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to replace it with handler. Handler. All right, so handler will exist or will have continued. And if this does work, then we're going to be able to call the correct context methods. And
can I just, sorry, your try catch, if that, is that going to throw a null pointer exception if it doesn't cast correctly? So if it's not of type trigger handler, it's going to throw a different type of exception, isn't it?
It's a good question. I don't know. So why don't we do this? Oh, but we won't know we don't have a handle to concretely cast it to the class name. We've got to do it to the virtual class, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to do it to the virtual class, and
I think you've just got to change that
to exception
like then your catch. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, have we declared handler anywhere?
Right here.
We're giving it a type.
That's a good call. Let's do this. That should do it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Why does this give me a squiggle? Invalidated. Okay, fine. So I'm going to save this. Now it's going to do its thing, and when it finishes saving, I'm actually going to pull the metadata from the org because I just created this custom metadata, so my local editor doesn't understand what metadata-driven trigger is. That's why we're getting that. Oh, but we've got a invalid bind expression of schema s object type for column of type string. So
okay, so we knew that, right? We thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, but I think there's a method on schema s object type, right? Schema get s object type. I love the docs. That's not what I wanted. I want the schema s object type class. And
you can do describe again. So at that point, so all I've done is move to describe. It wasn't a great plan of mine. You have to do get describe.getName again.
All right, that's fine. We'll just do. Yeah, I'm gonna change that in my helper method down here. So we'll do get describe dot get name, and I'm gonna copy pasta that right down there. This is gonna return string, and then up here, s object type is now a string. That should work. This is exciting. We're making good time here. Somebody from YouTube is saying that my beard has gotten longer. That's true. I am growing my beard out until I get 100 viewers in at least one of my Code Live episodes. So, phone a friend. My daughter's starting to be scared of my beard. Started referring to it as Daddy and Fuzzy. So my beard has a name now.
That's nice. My daughter decided to make mine purple last lockdown.
Nice. My younger one likes to pull on it. There's enough of it here that, you know, a 2-year-old can really get a good grip and yank. So help me out. Tell your friends, families, you know, dogs, cats, get them all to tune in. All right, so this saved. I think we're good there. And our query should run. So now what we need to do is we need to modify a trigger to call metadata trigger handler instead of account trigger handler. So let's open up our...
Sorry, Kevin, really quickly, you mentioned that you were going to just pull down the metadata.
Oh, that's right.
Metadata type.
Pull. Doing its thing here. And then let's go find our trigger. Let's change account trigger handler. Instead of account trigger handler, we're going to say this is going to be metadata trigger handler. Did it pull everything? Yes, good. And we'll save that. Saving. All right, so that's saved. And now, like in theory, this should be a drop-in replacement. So we should be able to just go run our unit tests and see that the account trigger handler unit tests still pass.
We created the metadata record right at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Let's try it.
I mean, there's only one way to find out, right? That's why we're not going to kill, we're not going to break anything, right?
Yep. Account trigger handler tests. And I'm just going to scroll all the way up to the top here. It occurs to me that metadata records, account metadata records, or custom metadata records, I don't need to see all data is true, do I? I don't think so. We're just going to run all the tests. What could go wrong?
I mean, the worst case is it fails.
Right.
We all feel sad temporarily, and then we move on and fix it.
Problem solving. That's what we do. Kevin, does the thing SF Nerdy wants to know if this avoids recursion? Yes, it does, but it's that recursion avoidance happens at the trigger handler level. You'll notice that in the trigger handler virtual class that we have a couple of methods here, exceeded and increment, and these are all working off of the loop count. So this will tell you how many times this trigger is fired, and you can set that to 1. It currently is set to a maximum of 5, and sets that initial count to 0. That's all based in the sort of trigger handler level, so anything that inherits from that, including our metadata trigger handler, will work with it. We got some finished Apex tests. Let's see whether or not it passed. They appear to all be passing, and I have to admit, so all the unit tests passed, so now we have to deal with the 4 horsemen in the end of days. Really? Are they all going to pass? They did. They all passed.
This wasn't in the script. This is not what you promised me.
I did not expect that. Let's see what kind of code coverage we get for the metadata trigger handler that we just wrote. And it appears that aside from a couple of cases, it works great. We get good coverage. We don't have an invalid run set up here, and that's fine, because honestly, I want to test that at the trigger handler level, not here in what I've overridden.
Yep.
But I should probably write a unit test for this one. And we don't have an undelete, but overall, I think that went really well.
I mean, despite the fact that you used the word trigger, but it went really well. My slight snafu with the let's return and get an S object type. But
yeah, I know I'm really excited about that. And what happens is now, whenever you write a new trigger handler class, and more importantly, if you've got several divisions all wanting to write triggers on the same object, you can now say, okay, well, division 1, here is your division 1 account trigger handler that extends trigger handler, and you can put all your logic in there, whatever you want. And then, you and division 2 can duke it out as to see who gets to run first. And set that up so that these all run in order, and you're not stepping on somebody else when they're trying to write trigger handlers and so forth. And if you want to take it even one step further than that, then instead of having one massive trigger handler for each object, you can have trigger handlers that run for very specific things. Like, I need to trigger a validation data lookup for the address on accounts whenever one's entered. But I don't really care when that runs, so long as it runs relatively quickly. So I'll put that at the end of the line, and somebody else is going to say, well, I need to validate the email address or something, and you can do that right up front. Get some more questions here in the chat here. Can we capture the loop count in the custom metadata object itself? I mean, you could. I'm not entirely sure why you would want to, because that loop count would overwrite itself, or theoretically change itself. Oh, I see. Wait. Okay, hold on a second. The light has dawned. Yeah. You totally could. I don't know that we have time to do that today, but you totally could. You could pull your loop count max from the custom metadata. Let's see. You might also be able to pull some of the other configuration stuff. Some of the other things that the trigger handler framework we use allows you to do are disable other triggers. So you could say, I want to disable the contact trigger, for instance. I'm not sure why you would, but let's say you wanted to.
But you could go further with this one, right? Actually, now you could disable a particular part of a trigger in the custom metadata.
You could, and that's up to. I mean, that's a very advanced use case. And I think for Apex recipes, we want to demonstrate what's possible and sort of a plausible use case. But you could, go in there and say enable methods, and what order you want those methods run in. And the thing is that this is customizable without deploying. So if you're going to go run a massive data insert, you could just go into the custom metadata interface and disable those. And maybe what we want to do, and this probably makes sense, where the object type is, and we'll do and enabled true. So if we go back over to our custom metadata, we can quickly add an enabled checkbox. Go here, and we'll say, and just to make sure I don't break anything here, I'm going to default it to checked. Because why would you want to go in here and not have it checked as you're putting these in normally?
Yeah.
And then if we go to manage metadata triggers, you'll see that we've got enabled. We'll save that. And so now we've very quickly just added this ability to disable specific trigger handlers without deleting the record and without deploying. So this is very configurable without deploying. It's one of the reasons I like it. Somebody asked me, is this the same logic as TDTM in the EDA trigger handler model? No. EDA, the higher ed data model, the education data model, I think is what it stands for. They use trigger defined, I forget exactly what TDM stands for, but it's their trigger model that's defined in a very similar way, but not identical. They use custom settings. We're using custom metadata. I don't think they're custom instantiating the classes the way we are here. I don't think they're doing it this way. I think they are doing it in a slightly different way, but it's a similar idea. The idea here, though, is that I can turn around and deploy these custom metadata records. So I can deploy from one org to another that this trigger exists and is turned on, which is sort of the main reason I would use custom metadata over custom settings. Let's see here. Does anybody have other questions? What will happen if I really need to update the record, which should execute the complete trigger? Assume the loop count is exceeded already. If I understand your question, TBR, if the loop count has already been exceeded, then it will throw a loop count exception. So if we go into our trigger handler and look at our, I'm just going to search for exception. It's got a trigger handler exception that it throws. And so if the loop count set max loop count, add the loop count. If the limit is exceeded, then it will throw a trigger handler exception. And it will tell you which handler failed and that sort of work. So that's a great question here. Raj is so true. I'm more than happy to when I pass test method. Yeah, passing the test methods is. I honestly didn't expect that to happen. I figured there'd be something I forgot to switch over, but that was pretty cool. Deborah wants to know, what about when we need triggers to be turned off for certain users, like integration users? You could do that with your query here as well. You could say, and what is it? User info dot get username. I guess it's just get user ID. Well, you could add custom metadata to the record saying disable for a particular user and then query those out here. So you could turn it off for integration user if you knew their ID. Isn't there a get user info?
I've done this previously with this pattern by adapting it and having it in custom settings instead. So you can set a custom setting per user to enable or disable at a much higher level. I know it's not the pattern, it's not where we're going today, but
yeah, you can get username. Okay, so you can get username and then compare it to the user login name. You can get user email, which is probably slightly more specific, harder to. It's portable across orgs, but also less likely to be, accidentally fat-fingered is my thought. Let's see, other questions here. Yeah, it can't be hard-coded that way. I have a client with a lot of different users and needs to turn some stuff off for some users. There's no reason you couldn't do that. And if you have if you want to do this pattern with it, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is look at our last week's session that I did with Beth Bryness, and she and I did custom metadata relationships, and we did it with a use case of this bucketed pick list. I don't want to really go into all the details of what we did last week. Tune in to the video and watch it. But what we did with the relationships, and because it's a metadata entity relationship, we could go in there and if we just added a field here, I'll demonstrate a little bit. I'm going to do a metadata relationship, and I'm going to tie this to an entity definition. If I hit the right button. Let me try that again. Entity relationship. And then I'm going to go to entity definition, and I can tie it to user, but I can't tie it to a specific user. Huh. But I could.
Users aren't metadata, right?
Yeah, I could do. Hierarchy type custom settings. I mean, there's no reason. It's only back up, Deborah. There's no reason you couldn't use a custom setting for disabling it and then build that into your logic here. So you could grab these triggers and then grab the custom settings to determine which of these are enabled for that user. But I feel like there's got to be a way for you to disable certain triggers for certain users, all based in the metadata. And I'm trying to think about how you could do that. And you could build out custom metadata that is related to this custom metadata. So we've got custom metadata types here, and you can relate to that, which would be an individual trigger, and then have a disabled for custom metadata type that, since it relates to this one, you could say, and user is not in this. And again, we only have 8 minutes, so I don't think that I can demonstrate that in that time, but I think that's entirely doable. Let's see other questions. TBR is saying, is there a reason why there is an exception when loop count is exceeded? Why can't we just return the trigger execution? TBR, that is a good question, and the answer to that is I prefer to throw an exception when something I don't want to happen happens. You could return to the rest of the trigger, but I want to know that it didn't work like I expected, and I want to know an exception occurred, so I coded it to record an exception. Let's see here if we have other questions. Let's see. Other one. People are asking questions. Yes, it's being recorded. These are great questions. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Simon, do you have anything you want to, give me a hard time on or comment on as to how we did this?
I really love this. I think when we first did this, we talked a lot about the use case of packages and having triggers across packages, and I think that's certainly something we've discussed in our org as we've kind of tried to move to a more kind of package orientated approach and trying to split things up, as you say, across divisions and then giving everybody a package, and that's really useful to be able to follow something like this.
I'm gonna.
Come on.
I'm gonna attempt to. While you talk, I'm gonna attempt to code this with the custom.
Attempt to code.
Yeah, disabled 4.
I like how you could have had 8 minutes to do it, but actually you've just given yourself 6.
Yeah. I like the pressure. So
I thought you did.
Is it possible to turn off a trigger only for a particular user when he runs the data loader? That's what I'm actually working on right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a custom field to this disabled for custom metadata, and it's going to be a metadata relationship, and I'm going to do an entity relationship. Entity definition. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to choose metadata driven trigger. So I'm tying this disabled for to the metadata driven trigger. And I'm going to call this one metadata driven trigger. That's fine. This one has to exist. It's required. And then go next and next and save. and I'm going to create a new custom field, and this one is going to be an email address, and I'm going to call this one user email, and that's also required, and we'll save that. So if we manage this and I create a new record, you'll see that I have to trigger it to a metadata driven trigger. So I've only got one, that's my test one. So I'll link it there. I'm going to say, and then my user email, I'm going to do foo@bar.com. Now that obviously isn't a username for the Salesforce org, but it'll be enough to demonstrate. And then in my query, I'm also going to say where, and I'm going to do subquery ID in select email. I called it email, right? User email. I'm gonna run out of time on this one. From my disabled for MDT, and that's I want to do not in. So we're not in that. From
you're gonna want to put a where on your subquery.
Where user email not user info dot get user email.
You need your where's needs to be at the end.
Oh yeah.
Your query's in the wrong order.
I can think. There we go. And I'm certain that I've got, like this is like that. There's probably some typos in this. But this, what it will do is it will say, if I have a record that has a user address that matches this one, then it will fail. Then it will not return that row, and it will not execute that trigger. So any record that is in that metadata relationship will cause this trigger not to fire for that user. And we have 2 minutes left. I can either try and debug this, or we can answer any more questions that have come up. Heather says, is it possible to turn off the trigger? Yeah, so we're just running that. And how different is it from Force DI? I don't know what Force DI is. Does anybody know what Force DI is? No. That's why that's doing there. I'm sad that it didn't auto-format that. It's the little things. From disabled for MDT, that's unexpected by. What? Not in. Not expected token.
But you need user email equals, don't you? After in your where clause of your subquery, you've not got an equals.
Yeah, good call. Now it formatted. That seems like it's a better thing. Dependency injection library. I'm assuming Linden Beacon. I'm not familiar with that dependency injection library, so I can't answer that question. Great. So the only issue we have going on here is that we have the user email is the wrong name. But we are out of time. So thank you again to Simon Goodyear for joining me. Thank you for being our PHP of the day. And I'll see everyone next week on Thursday.